Well, this is another podcast regarding the reason why Christianity changed from the celebration of Passover to the celebration of the pagan feast of Ostra. And I finished last time speaking about and mentioning the Feast of First Fruits, which is not for our purpose today. So what is my purpose in these recent podcasts and my writing of the booklet? Well, my purpose at this point is to show that God's timing was set at creation and that it was to point to his feasts, Passover being the first annual feast. It was to be yearly. The purpose of that being to remember that God brought the Hebrews out of slavery by using the blood of the Passover lamb to protect the Hebrews from death during the 10th plague. This feast was an everlasting memorial to that, but it also pointed forward to the Messiah who, as Yeshua, was to fulfill this feast and set all of mankind free. So what next? Well, Christendom, which is, as Paul says, is part of Judaism and rooted into Israel, doesn't today celebrate Passover. It celebrates Easter with all the symbols of the rabbit and the egg. So what's gone wrong? My next purpose in writing is to answer this very important question. In answering this, I must take us back to my reference to Nimrod, who created a tower with a chapel at the top and a priesthood to worship the sun and gods which they created. Babylon was an empire which Daniel the prophet referred to, and he wrote about 3 empires which would follow Babylon. These were the joint empire of Medo-Persia, the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire. Although they were all political and military empires, Daniel was referring to them in the context of their spirituality and forms and times of worship. He symbolized the first 3 with empires of animals, the Babylonian Empire as the lion, the Medo-Persia Empire as the bear, and the Greek Empire as the leopard, and the last empire, the Roman Empire, as a terrifying beast. Interestingly, John the Apostle also prophesied about these empires in the book of Revelation, and he identified the false Messiah as manifesting as a man towards the end of the Roman Empire. And I think that's one reason why he also described the Roman Empire as a terrifying beast. Babylon reigned from 606 BC and they worshipped many gods. But when the Medo-Persian Empire overcame Babylon in 536 BC, they drove out the Babylonian priesthood who fled to a place called Pergamum. The Medo-Persians continued to worship the sun and the fertility gods and of course other gods. But they were overcome by the Greek Empire in 330 BC, which instituted the worship of the same gods as the Medo-Persians and the Babylonians, but gave them different names. Then when the Romans beat the Greeks, establishing a huge Roman Empire in 30 BC, they worshipped the same gods as the Greek gods, using different names for them, of course. They called the fertility goddess Ostra and worshipped her at the spring equinox and did so every year, symbolizing her worship with the rabbit and the egg, as I have stated earlier. In 30 BC, when the Romans conquered Greece, the Babylonian priesthood was still practicing the worship of their original gods, but also the gods of the other 3 empires, resulting in Pergamon becoming the center of pagan worship of the Roman Empire. Pergamon was the center of the worship for the whole of the empire, with pilgrimages of pagan worshippers from all over the empire attending Pergamon. Roman society looked towards Pergamon as the spiritual home of their gods and goddesses. Pergamon is situated just across the water from where John the Apostle was imprisoned in Patmos. When John wrote the prophecies about the return of Yeshua in the book of Revelation, he said the Messiah would conquer the false Messiah and then go on to reign for 1,000 years. He also wrote that Pergamon was the seat of Satan. No wonder he wrote this, considering the power this priesthood held over the spiritual life of the Roman Empire from its center of worship in the city of Pergamum. When the high priest of Pergamum, Metellus, the pontiff of Pergamum, pontiff meaning bridge between earth and heaven, died in 133 BC, he bequeathed his position to the Roman emperors. Julius Caesar was the first to accept this spiritual role in 74 BC and became supreme pontiff of the Babylonian order of worship to the gods in 63 BC. In fact, he was considered a god himself. This meant that the Roman emperors, from that time on, became not only political and military rulers, but also the spiritual rulers of the empire. I want to mention here that every empire from Babylon to Rome had persecuted Jews and been their enemy. So it is no wonder that the Romans were the empire which destroyed the temple of God in Jerusalem in 70 AD. Every empire, including Rome, also tried to annul or change God's calendar of worship and, of course, his appointed times. So I want to thank you for listening this morning, and I want to say Shabbat Shalom to you. And as we come closer to the celebration of Passover, I'll bring you another podcast next week. So Shabbat Shalom, Mike Fryer, Wales.